Every single day, a massive corporation collects approximately 66 million United States dollars, yet somehow manages to lose money every time the sun sets. Commercial aviation looks like the ultimate capitalist cash machine. Millions of passengers swipe credit cards daily, funneling billions of dollars into an industry connecting the planet. But behind the glossy departure lounges, towering machines, and the logistical miracle of global flight, the math of moving human beings is brutally unforgiving. Airlines operate in an environment defined by high capital expenditure, massive asset depreciation, highly volatile fuel costs, and razor thin profit margins. To run an airline is to fight a war of attrition against your own balance sheet. It's a sector where billions are routinely made, yet equally massive sums evaporate in an instant due to factors completely out of an executive's control. Nowhere is this paradox more visible or geopolitically significant than in the People's Republic of China. As of 2026, the nation's flagship carrier, Air China, stands as a towering behemoth of global aviation. By physical footprint, international reach, and sheer top line revenue, it's an undisputed titan. It moves millions of people and thousands of tons of cargo across the globe. But if you peer closely at the corporate ledger, a baffling financial reality emerges. In 2025, Air China generated roughly 171.48 billion Chinese yuan, translating to about 24 billion United States dollars. By all visible operating metrics, the airline was thriving. The planes were full, capacity grew, and the route network expanded. But when the fiscal year closed, the airline posted a net loss of roughly $250 million. dollars. How is it physically and economically possible to generate tens of billions in cash, command the most prestigious international routes of a modern economic superpower, operate in a massive domestic market, and still bleed money every time the wheels leave the tarmac? To understand how an airline can be so massive, yet far from wealthy, we got to break down its complex architecture. We'll explore the strategic logic behind its fleet, the harsh math of its per plane profitability, and the devastating economic impact of domestic high speed rail, plus its aggressive pivot toward homegrown Chinese aircraft. Air China is undeniably big, but in the brutal margins of the global airline industry, why is it struggling to actually make a profit? To understand the sheer scale of Air China, you have to stop thinking of it as a traditional company operating in a free market. Air China is a flag carrier. A flag carrier is an airline heavily subsidized or outright owned by a government to represent the nation globally. With approximately 104,909 employees and total assets hovering around $43 billion, Air China is a strategic pillar of national infrastructure. It acts as the literal winged extension of the state. Its financial statements paint a picture of a massive yet financially vulnerable giant. For Air China, performance is not just a measure of business acumen, it's a barometer of China's geopolitical priorities. Air China was born out of deliberate state engineering. Up until the late 1980s, Chinese aviation was controlled by a monolithic state run entity known as the Civil Aviation Administration of China. Founded in 1949, the CAAC functioned as both the regulatory body and the sole operator of all commercial flights in the country. In 1988, the Chinese government executed a massive restructuring of its aviation sector. They split the operational arm of the CAAC into six separate regionally focused airlines. Out of this strategic split, Air China was established in Beijing and given a very specific mandate. It was explicitly created to handle the nation's intercontinental flights and inherit the CAAC's long haul aircraft. While other airlines connected domestic provinces, Air China was given the highly lucrative landing slots at Beijing Capital International Airport and the keys to the world. Over the decades, it consolidated its power by absorbing other carriers, most notably acquiring China Southwest Airlines in 2001, which massively expanded its fleet and assets. By 2004, it was successfully listed on the Hong Kong and London stock exchanges. Yet today, despite the public stock tickers, it remains majority state owned, with 53.46% held by the China National Aviation Holding Company, ensuring Beijing always retains ultimate operational control. To fulfill its mandate of moving millions of people across 190 countries, you need a tremendous amount of heavy metal. Air China operates a mainline fleet of 531 aircraft, though this expands to over 900 when including its broader group of subsidiaries. This fleet is carefully split to hedge geopolitical risks and navigate global supply chain vulnerabilities. For dense, high frequency domestic routes, they rely on the absolute workhorses of the sky, a mix of Airbus A320 family jets and Boeing 737s. These narrow body aircraft are highly efficient, allowing for fast turnarounds at airport gates and lower fuel burn on short hops. For international dominance, they deploy a formidable wide body fleet consisting of Airbus A330s, A350s, Boeing 777s, and 787 Dreamliners. These massive machines cross oceans carrying hundreds of passengers and tons of highly lucrative belly cargo needed for 12-hour flights to Europe and North America. When an airline loses roughly $250 million across 531 mainline planes in a single year, the per plane economics look incredibly grim. On average, taking the fleet as a whole, Air China lost roughly $470,000 per aircraft in 2025. In any standard capitalist enterprise, a machine that loses nearly $500,000 a year would be immediately liquidated. But airlines do not evaluate planes in isolation. They view them as nodes in a giant interconnected web known as the hub and spoke model. To understand the relentless financial pressure of commercial aviation, consider the raw physics of flight. The Boeing 777 300ER, a staple of Air China's long haul fleet, burns roughly 17,000 pounds of Jet A fuel every single hour it remains airborne. A single 14-hour flight from Beijing to New York consumes tens of thousands of dollars in jet fuel alone. This is before accounting for the salaries of the pilots, the flight attendants, the airport landing fees, and the sheer depreciation of a machine that costs over $300 million. Yet, that flight might still print millions of dollars in pure profit over the course of a year if the premium cabins and cargo holds are full. However, the mathematical reality of airline logistics dictates that this lucrative long haul flight is only possible because dozens of smaller domestic flights acted as feeders. Passengers fly from smaller cities like Harbin, Dalian, or Qingdao on a 737 simply to connect to the 777 in Beijing. The airline relies on the combined volume of all those smaller flights to fill the larger, profitable one. For the hub and spoke model to work efficiently, the domestic feeder network needs to at least break even. Right now, however, that domestic feeder network in China is an absolute financial bloodbath. The economics of short haul domestic flying have completely deteriorated. The primary culprit behind this destruction of profitability is not a rival airline, an economic recession, or volatile jet fuel prices. The culprit is a train. Over the last 2 decades, China has built the most extensive high speed rail network on Earth, laying down over 45,000 kilometers of dedicated track. In transportation economics, there is a widely recognized threshold for when a train becomes more efficient than a plane. Research indicates a stark reality. For trips under 800 kilometers, high speed rail offers faster, cheaper, and vastly more reliable door to door service than air travel. Aviation is incredibly fast in the air, but incredibly slow on the ground. A flight between two cities 800 kilometers apart might only take 90 minutes in the air, but air travel requires a passenger to travel from the city center to an airport located far outside the urban core, arrive 2 hours early to clear invasive security protocols, and wait at a boarding gate. Upon landing, they must taxi, deplane, claim baggage, and secure transportation into the new city. That 2 hour flight consumes 5 or 6 hours of the day. A high speed train, by contrast, operates from massive, centrally located transit hubs directly inside the city. A passenger can arrive 20 minutes before departure, step onto a train traveling at 350 kilometers per hour with perfect punctuality, and step off directly into the heart of their destination. Furthermore, Chinese airspace is uniquely constrained. Unlike in the United States, where the Federal Aviation Administration controls the vast majority of the sky for civilian use, the Chinese military strictly controls approximately 70 to 80% of the nation's airspace. Commercial airliners are confined to very specific, exceedingly narrow flight corridors. When bad weather hits or when military exercises take place, these narrow corridors become highly congested. Commercial flights cannot simply be routed around storm cells, they're forced into holding patterns or grounded entirely, resulting in massive cascading delays across the entire domestic aviation network. High speed rail, bolted firmly to the earth, sidesteps this entirely. The impact of this high speed rail network on Chinese aviation has been entirely devastating. Transportation studies confirm that the introduction of high speed rail services dropped domestic air passenger demand on parallel routes by an average of 28.2%, forcing airlines to slash their seat capacity. On highly trafficked major arteries, the demand destruction is even worse. After the commencement of the Wuhan Guangzhou high speed rail line, air travel on that exact route plummeted by approximately 45%. When the flagship Beijing Shanghai high speed rail line opened, serving the most lucrative business corridor in the country, it triggered a 34% drop in aviation demand between the two financial powerhouses. By 2025, approximately 80% of China's domestic airline routes are projected to physically overlap with existing high speed rail lines. One might assume that in a country of 1.4 billion people, sheer volume alone guarantees enough demand to sustain both a massive rail network and a massive aviation sector. But in the airline industry, sheer volume does not equal high margin revenue. High speed rail skims the cream off the top of the market. It takes the business travelers who value time and reliability, leaving the airlines to fight over highly price sensitive leisure travelers. Because the China State Railway Group is heavily subsidized by the state, they can offer incredibly cheap tickets, backing Chinese airlines into a corner. They're forced into intense, margin destroying fare wars. They must redeploy their narrow body planes and slash ticket prices to rock bottom levels just to get bodies in seats. The fixed costs of operating a passenger jet does not decrease just because you sold the ticket for a fraction of the cost. Selling high volumes of incredibly cheap tickets means the airline is effectively subsidizing the passenger's travel just to maintain market share. To truly understand how this structural disadvantage impacts Air China, we got to compare them to their peers. Domestically, Air China is locked in a brutal war with the other members of China's state owned Big Three. Down south in Guangzhou and China Southern Airlines, the undisputed heavyweight champion of sheer volume in Asia, operating a massive mainline fleet of 598 aircraft. Over on the eastern coast is China Eastern Airlines, boasting a mainline fleet of 576 planes and dominating the highly lucrative transit traffic flowing in and out of Shanghai. Air China is slightly smaller than its two rivals by pure mainline fleet size, but it leverages its unique political geography in Beijing to capture the highest margin diplomatic flows and premium international long haul routes. Yet, despite their different geographical advantages, all three of these Chinese aviation giants struggle with the exact same structural issues. They're all fighting the exact same domestic fare wars, dealing with the exact same high depreciation costs, and bleeding revenue to the exact same high speed rail network. But if you want to understand the true definition of a rich airline, you have to look across the Pacific Ocean. When you compare Air China to the American Big Three, the definition of wealth in the aviation sector completely changes. In the United States, airlines are pure capitalist profit machines, completely unbound by the state obligations that restrict Air China. Look at Delta Airlines. In 2025, Delta generated a staggering $63.4 billion in revenue, more than double the revenue of Air China, and brought home $5 billion in pure net income. United Airlines pulled in $59.1 billion in revenue and reported roughly $3.4 billion in net income. Even American Airlines operated a mainline fleet that eclipses 1,000 aircraft, driving $54.6 billion in revenue and reporting $111 million in net income. How is it possible that the American carriers extract such massive profit margins while Chinese carriers consistently bleed money? The answer lies in a fundamentally different business model. United States airlines are essentially highly profitable banks that just happen to fly airplanes as a side hustle. Over the last 2 decades, U.S. carriers realized that flying airplanes is a volatile, low margin business subject to the whims of fuel prices, weather, and economic downturns. But selling frequent flyer miles is a high margin, virtually risk free financial enterprise. Delta's loyalty ecosystem, the Sky Miles program, is a financial juggernaut. Wall Street values the program alone at an estimated $31 billion, which is frequently higher than the market capitalization of the airline itself. The mechanics of this wealth are brilliant. Airlines mint their own fiat currency, which is the frequent flyer mile, and sell billions of these miles to credit card companies, primarily American Express. American Express pays the airline real, hard cash for these miles. The sheer volume of this transaction is staggering. Spending on Delta co-branded Amex cards counts for roughly 1% of the entire United States GDP. American Express uses these miles as a reward incentive to get consumers to sign up for premium credit cards and spend money. When a consumer uses a co branded Delta Amex card to buy groceries, Amex pays Delta for the miles awarded to the consumer. In 2025 alone, Delta's co brand credit card relationship with American Express brought in an unbelievable $8.2 billion in pure remuneration. The American carriers dominate the global industry in sheer financial wealth because they extract massive margins from unbundling fares, charging for checked bags, selling premium seating upgrades, and dominating a highly consolidated domestic market where they do not have to compete with a high speed train network. Air China simply does not have these financial levers to pull. The Chinese consumer market operates entirely different. The vast majority of consumer transactions in China are processed through mobile payment platforms like WeChat Pay and Alipay. These platforms charge incredibly low merchant fees, often between 0.1 and 0.3%, and they do not support the massive lucrative mileage ecosystems that American banks use to subsidize US airlines. Without a multi billion dollar credit card pipeline, Air China is forced to try and make its money the old fashioned way by selling plane tickets. Looking forward, Air China faces a clear decision tree. As a business, it could hypothetically retreat from unprofitable domestic routes, ground inefficient wide body aircraft, and aggressively restructure to maximize shareholder returns, much like a Western airline would. Alternatively, it could lean fully into its role as a state champion, deliberately sacrificing financial margins to project geopolitical power and build a domestic aerospace industry. Because it is the winged extension of the state, Air China is actively choosing the latter. Air China is actively integrating the COMAC C919 into its fleet. For decades, the global supply of large commercial aircraft has been a duopoly controlled by the United States and Europe. The Chinese government, recognizing the extreme geopolitical vulnerability of relying entirely on foreign powers for its aviation sector, founded the Commercial Aircraft Corporation of China, or COMAC, to break this duopoly. In a landmark industry shifting deal, Air China placed a massive firm order for 100 extended range variants of the C919. At list prices, this order is valued at roughly $10.8 billion, with deliveries planned in batches stretching continuously from 2024 through 2031. The C919 is specifically designed from the ground up to go head to head with the undisputed heavyweights of the global aviation market, the Boeing 737 MAX 8 and the Airbus A320neo. The specific extended range variant that Air China ordered boasts a maximum takeoff weight of 78.9 metric tons and an improved maximum range of 5,555 kilometers. By comparison, a Boeing 737 MAX 8 operates with a slightly higher maximum takeoff weight of 82.1 metric tons and a slightly longer range of 6,570 kilometers. Introducing a completely new aircraft type into an airline's fleet is a logistical and financial nightmare. Airlines rely on fleet commonality. If an airline only flies the Boeing 737, every pilot is certified to fly every plane, mechanics only learn one system, and the airline only warehouses one specific inventory of spare parts. By forcing Air China to adopt the COMAC C919, the airline is being forced to introduce an entirely new logistical supply chain into its operations. They must purchase brand new, multi million dollar flight simulators, pull pilots out of active service to retrain them on a completely new cockpit interface, establish entirely new maintenance protocols, stockpile unique spare parts, and deal with the inevitable mechanical teething issues that plague any new airframe. A purely profit driven airline would wait for other carriers to work out the bugs before buying in. But the adoption of the C919 by Air China is not a decision driven by pure fleet optimization, it's a state mandated strategic shift. By leaning heavily on its flagship carrier to adopt the C919, Beijing is intentionally guaranteeing base demand for its domestic aerospace industry. COMAC is still a young manufacturer. It currently lacks the massive, finely tuned supply chain efficiency of its Western rivals. To fulfill Air China's order on time, COMAC needs to manufacture and deliver an average of 14 aircraft per year just to this one single airline. Yet, from a geopolitical standpoint, the objective is crystal clear. China wants to slowly insulate its economy and its transportation sector from Western supply chain vulnerabilities and the constant threat of future trade tariffs. If the United States were to ever sanction the export of Boeing parts, or if Europe restricted Airbus sales, China needs a functional domestic alternative ready to keep the country flying. If Air China has to absorb the massive financial growing pains, logistical delays, and operational inefficiencies of a completely new aircraft program, that is simply the accepted cost of doing state business. They're providing the essential runway for COMAC to eventually become a true global competitor to Airbus and Boeing. So, ultimately, how big and rich is Air China? By physical footprint, network scale, global reach, and asset valuation, it is an undisputed titan of the modern world. It operates one of the most sophisticated, geographically diverse, and well maintained fleets on the planet. Through its operations, it drives tens of billions of dollars in economic activity every single year, moving millions of citizens and thousands of tons of high value exports across borders. The sheer logistical complexity of its daily operations rivals any military deployment on Earth.